I took a risk when I picked up the phone, somehow got Charles Schultz's number, the guy that drew Peanuts, and I was an aspiring cartoonist. And I took a risk in calling him because back then kids weren't allowed to make long distance phone calls, but I was very determined and precocious, or so I'm told. And I called Charles Schultz on the phone and simply said, I want to be a cartoonist when I grow up. And I did eventually. And that was risk number one. Risk number two was running away from home at 15. I was a troubled teen in my early years and took off from my family in the town that I grew up in, swearing I'd never come back and be around those people in that town again. And I spent the rest of my life coming back and loving being around my family in that town. And lastly, at age 23, I got an offer to move to New York City, and I had no money in my pocket, but I took a risk in going with the idea that 50 bucks could go a long way if I just took a leap. And it was a leap of faith. So those are my three major risks I've taken, and I will continue taking those because they eventually lead me to where I need to be in life.
I took a risk when I went to medical school. I can remember being a little apprehensive about the whole thing because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. But I remember driving down the street, leaving Cookeville and going to the medical school. I cried all the way till I left Cookeville city limits, and then I got over it. And when I got to school, I had a roommate who was just a dear person. I've been very fond of him all my life. So that was the big jump of leaving home. That's the first time I'd left home because I didn't go away to college.
I took a risk when I quit the best job that I ever had. Before I quit, I borrowed a year's salary, and I bought an Apple Macintosh computer and a 300 dots per inch laser writer. And I started a desktop publishing business, even though I didn't know anything about it. I just drove from one print shop to another print shop, hoping I could find work. And I was worried about taking that risk. I had never borrowed that much money. I had never made that much money in a year, but I had 3 kids, and I knew that I needed to take care of them, and the $3.35 an hour was not getting it for me to raise kids, not a living wage. And so I did take that risk and borrow the money, and I knew that failure was not an option for me. So I worked as hard as I could and did the best that I could, and it worked out. My kids are grown. I still enjoy starting businesses, and that's what I've done all of my life. And ever since taking the risk, I've realized that the thrill of starting and growing a business, there's just nothing better. It's exciting to think of something that other people will enjoy.
I took a risk when I decided to go to the officers candidate school in the United States Marine Corps, and thereon to Vietnam. I, along with many others, took that risk. I was more fortunate than many. And then I took another risk to go to law school. And after graduation, turning down a clerkship to come to a small town, the small town of McMinnville, Tennessee, to practice law on my own, renting my first office, buying used furniture, and hiring a secretary, and going to a legal war with perhaps more confidence than practical knowledge of the law. I've been doing that for 50 years now.
I took a risk when I turned 40. I had the opportunity, after working in the design industry for many years, to open my own firm. And I was obviously quite nervous about it, but I asked my dad what I should do. I asked him for some advice, and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Son, if it doesn't work, you can always go get a job." And that was it. I was out of there.
I figured out I'm not a risky person. I was not risky in my college choice. I wasn't risky in my career goals, but one actual physical risk that I took was I went skydiving, and probably never again would I do that. And I'm proud of myself for doing that. And that was a risk that I'll never forget.